Hello, beautiful people. This is Venerable Thich Quang Tree on Dharma Tree, and this is Ask a Monk. So today's quick episode, hopefully quick episode, is the question on what's the difference between Theravada and Mahayana Buddhism. So as people get new or introduced about Buddhism and start reading Buddhism, then they will start to come across these two words or two traditions, right? If it's worded like that. But Theravada and Mahayana are the two main branches or school of Buddhism. Theravada means the way of the elders, or the path of the elders, or sometimes it's less commonly known as Hinayana. And of course, there's Mahayana. Mahayana literally means large vehicle, right? Maha is great or large, and yana means vehicle. So Mahayana is the large vehicle, Hinayana is the small vehicle, but we don't typically, or no one really typically uses the word Hinayana anymore. So for the most part, it's referred to Theravada. But Theravada is a tradition that's mostly in the South Asian countries, so like Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, Sri Lanka, and some of Vietnam, whereas Mahayana Buddhism is pretty much everywhere else for the most part. So China, Japan, Korea, Vietnam, and Taiwan. But there's no much differentiation in teachings for the most part. So the basic core of Buddhism, right, like all the core foundational teachings are found in both traditions. And both schools of Buddhism hold that same foundational sutras, right? So the Mahayana just has additional sutras that were written and produced after the Buddha's time. So the Theravada tradition, I typically call it or refer it to as the Orthodox tradition, um, because they most closely resemble the earliest Buddhist practice or earliest Buddhist monasticism. Whereas Mahayana has developed out of the Theravada thought, so it developed larger or more expansive thoughts and processes and ideas um, of human consciousness, for example, right? So the main difference, honestly, that the two schools have is that Theravada, the ceiling of enlightened attainment is the arhat, right? And that's pretty much the highest you can go, right? And they only believe in the historical Buddha Shakyamuni and his 10 main disciples. So those are pretty much their objects of veneration. Whereas in Mahayana thought, there is the concept of, other Buddhas, millions, billions of other Buddhas, right? Celestial Buddhas, celestial bodhisattvas and beings. And so the Bodhisattva ideal is, the ideal of Mahayana Buddhism is to develop yourself to becoming a bodhisattva so that you can return to samsara, return to the human life in order to help others attain enlightenment. And you would make a vow as a bodhisattva to withhold your full enlightenment to Buddhahood until all sentient beings are saved, essentially. But other than that ideal, Mahayana holds a lot of additional sutras, right? There's a lot of Mahayana sutras that you do not find in Theravada. So pretty much any Mahayana sutra that we know of, right? Like the Lankavatara Sutra, the Avatamsaka Sutra, Lotus Sutra, Diamond Sutra, the Heart Sutra. All these are Mahayana sutras that we do not find in Theravada Buddhism. But all the sutras in Theravada Buddhism, we do have in Mahayana, because again, we still share all the core teachings, all the core discourses and sutras that Theravada have. So that's pretty much the basic overview of the difference between the two. The only other real difference is sometimes the iconography. And if you go into a Buddhist temple, a Theravada temple, you'll see for the most part, that the decorative of the shrines are very much more simpler than Mahayana temples. And when you go into a Theravada temple, you'll almost always only notice the statue of Shakyamuni Buddha and two disciples sitting with him on the altar, or all 10 of his main disciples. But since they only believe in the historical Buddha, you would only ever see just the Shakyamuni Buddha statue. Whereas if we go into a Mahayana temple, we'll see sometimes dozens of different statues. And so, of course, you'll see the statue of Shakyamuni Buddha, and we'll also see the statue of Amitabha Buddha and statues of bodhisattvas. Most likely, it's either Kshitigarbha and Avalokiteshvara bodhisattvas or Samantabhadra and Manjushri bodhisattvas, as well as Devagarbhi bodhisattvas. And most Mahayana temples also have a back shrine room hall for the ancestral shrine. So it's usually like Bodhidharma, if it's a Zen tradition, or in my case, in our temple, it's Tiantai tradition. So we have Chi as our patriarch, or Zihi as our patriarch of Tiantai Buddhism. And so, other than the symbology of things, and of course, rituals are different, the services are different. And so there's some slight change and variation of how services are conducted, how chanting is even done, and of course the different rituals that are in the different traditions. For the most part, Theravada is simpler, honestly, in some cases. But I mean, even myself, when I first started to actually practice Buddhism, I started with Theravada practices and Theravada teachings. And it was probably a year or two into my study and practice where, this kind of may sound a little cheesy or weird, but I had a dream or a vision of something, whatever, of Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva, right? And I just took that as a sign to follow the Bodhisattva path, follow the Bodhisattva ideal. And so at that point, I kind of switched paths, I guess, right at the fork of the road. I switched from Theravada to Mahayana, and I've been a Mahayanaist ever since. Obviously, I'm a Mahayana Buddhist monk now, um, but really, there's no quarrel between the two traditions. Technically, there's also a third tradition, Vajrayana, which is Tibetan Buddhism. They are technically under the Mahayana umbrella, but for most scholars or Buddhist scholars, there is enough differentiation in Vajrayana Buddhism where we can see it as a third separate tradition for many reasons. One, they either don't use or accept some of the Mahayana teachings. They also have included their own teachings, Mahayana sutras, and teachings and commentaries and treatises from their own previous lamas and masters, and they also have a very strong esoteric or practice. They have strong esoteric practices, right? They combine Buddhism with their local Bon religion, which is, I guess, a mixture of shamanic and witchcrafty practices, right? And so they have a lot of extra stuff that really isn't found in either Theravada or Mahayana Buddhism. And so there's enough differentiation there where most people will consider Tibetan Buddhism or Vajrayana Buddhism as a whole separate tradition. I see it that way as well. And so usually if I'm describing or talking about the traditions, I will include Vajrayana as a third separate tradition for the most part. And letting, of course, everyone know that Silk technically falls under the Mahayana umbrella. But again, there's enough difference in there where I would consider it as a separate tradition. So that's pretty much the gist of it, right? So to conclude, Theravada or Hinayana, which no one refers to anymore, Theravada, they only follow or believe in the historical Buddha Shakyamuni and his 10 main disciples. And the Arhat is the ceiling of attainment. Of course, there's the other levels of enlightenment, like the Sotapadana, Sakadagami, Anagami, and Arhat. The stream enter, once returner, non-returner, and Arhat states of enlightenment, right? The 4 states of enlightenment. But the Arhat is their ceiling of being able to attain enlightenment or nirvana. Whereas in Mahayana Buddhism, the ideal is the Bodhisattva path, right? The path that one would become enlightened to a certain level and come back over and over again to relive their lives in order to help all sentient beings attain enlightenment as well. And in Mahayana, there's of course the belief in other Buddhas, right? Other Buddhas that existed, celestial Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, and different beings and whatnot. And of course, we have a plethora more of sutras and teachings as well. And there's the Vajrayana Buddhism, which is just the Tibetan Buddhism, Tibetan style of Buddhism. So that concludes the difference of the 2 main traditions of Theravada and Mahayana. So thank you for listening. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha.